Hey everyone, welcome back to ASURE. Now that we're in January, it's a time of year where people who applied to Oxford and Cambridge will be finding out whether they've received offers or not. Now this got me thinking back to my own experiences in applying to and getting rejected by the University of Oxford. It's been 4 years since that happened, and today I want to talk to you about why that might have been one of the best things to ever happen to me. If that sounds interesting, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification to stay updated for whenever I post. Without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Since I didn't get an offer from Oxford, as you might know, I ended up studying at the London School of Economics instead. And in fact, that might have been a better choice for me in the long run. And here's why. In fact, I think the only two things that Oxford quite clearly has as an advantage over LSE is its worldwide reputation and the quality of its teaching. With this video, bear in mind, I never went to Oxford, and so the comments that I'm making about the university are entirely based on the conversations that I've had with my friends and other people who I know who have studied there. And in fact, I'm not pro-Oxford or pro-LSE. In fact, if you want an honest review of my time at LSE, check out this video here. I just want to talk about how my perspective towards the two universities has changed from the time when I was actually first applying to these universities and versus having now graduated from the LSE. That's because there are several things that when I was applying in sixth form in year 12 and year 13, I really valued or thought would be really important to me, which now with the benefit of hindsight, I now realise aren't at all. Now, locationally, Oxford is a really beautiful city and it screams Harry Potter vibes to me. And in fact, I remember when I was first applying, I thought the idea of being able to explore all the various colleges in Oxford and, see the architecture would be really, really cool and something that I thought I'd really enjoy. To be honest, I still think that idea or that concept is really cool, but from the sounds of things, in reality, it sounds like Oxford students barely have the time to go and explore the city anyway, and we'll go talk about that later on in this video. Also, I've come to really love the hustle, bustle, and the diversity of experiences that London has to offer. Every part of London is just so unique. Think about how different, for example, Canary Wharf is to South Kensington. I remember when applying, I just had this image in my head that, the only place where I'd be able to find such beautiful historic architecture were in places like Oxford and Cambridge, and that everything in London was full of skyscrapers and was just a bit of a concrete monster. That couldn't be further from the truth. Just, even if you go to LSE, right next to campus you have something called the Royal Society of Lincoln's Inn Field, and if you walk through there, it's beautiful and it gives off a very, very similar vibe to, walking through a street in Oxford, for example. The other thing that is an advantage to London over Oxford in terms of location, and I've talked about this before, is that London is a hub for business. Most businesses have their UK headquarters in London, and that means that the opportunities for work experience, shadowing, and internships at large and small firms alike is a lot higher in London relative to what you'd find in Oxford. Therefore, in terms of CV, even though the name University of Oxford might carry higher weight or higher reputation than the London School of Economics, if you spend your time wisely whilst at the LSE, you can bolster your CV in different ways to more than offset this. So I think overall, if you go and study at a London-based university, for example, you are far less likely of running out of things to do and becoming bored relative to studying at Oxford or Cambridge, for example, where I've heard you run the risk of being bored after the first or second year where you've kind of explored everything that the city has to offer. I've talked about this before, but LSE has a very good reputation within the finance world, and it has a very strong track record of placing its students into prestigious and competitive spring weeks, internships, and graduate roles. In fact, I'd argue that because there are just so many LSE alumni at pretty much every single firm in the City of London, it might in fact be easier to network if you go to LSE relative to if you go to the University of Oxford, especially considering the fact that you're already based in London, so it's easier to reach out to these people. What I would say is that Oxford and Cambridge do tend to have an edge when it comes to management consulting, where it seems like the big three firms, McKinsey, BCG, and Bain, overwhelmingly recruit out of these two universities. However, that being said, it's not impossible to get interviews from these firms even if you don't go to Oxford and Cambridge. I myself got into a final round interview with McKinsey back in 2021. Now don't get me wrong, LSE has far from a light workload, but speaking to friends who study at the University of Oxford, it seems that it pales in comparison relative to what you get there. At Oxford, it broadly seems like there's a lot more to do, with people constantly having deadlines and essays due in. Now this could be a consequence of their shortened 8-week term. If you didn't know, Oxford and Cambridge have 3 8-week terms, whereas most other universities in the UK have 2 11-week terms with a bunch of exams after that. The implication of this is that Oxford and Cambridge have to pack in as much, if not more content in 8 weeks as what other universities have to do in 10 or 11. So as a sixth form student in year 12 and year 13, I remember finding the idea of having shortened terms and lots of time off from university really appealing. I think when you're at school, you can't wait for the school term to end so that you actually have time to go and hang out with friends and do other things besides just studying. At uni, my mindset, and I think the mindset of most other people, change in the sense that you don't ever really want university or term time to end. And that's because at university, even during term time, you have plenty of time to balance studying with going out and having fun and doing lots of extracurriculars, whereas that isn't the case when you're still at school. So with the benefit of hindsight, I'd actually really prefer 10 or 11 week terms, because not only is the workload more manageable, but I'm getting to spend more time with my university friends in an environment that I really enjoyed. Additionally, if you do go to the University of Oxford or Cambridge, I've heard that you're expected to be working on your studies during your holidays. The other thing to note about Oxford and Cambridge is their exam structure. At those two universities, the way their exams work is that only your final year exams count towards your end degree classification. So the exams, if you have any in the first and second year, don't count at all. And again, I thought that was pretty cool in sixth form, because I thought, oh, I'll have first and second year with no real academic pressure. What you forget or fail to realise is that means there is a tremendous amount of pressure in your third year to do well. And the other thing is, you're tested on all 3 years worth of content. So it's not like you're only examined on your third year content, you're examined on your first, second and third year content. So what that means is that even if you do extremely well in your first and second year of university, if for whatever reason you don't perform well in your final year exams, you can end up with a degree classification that doesn't fully reflect the pile or body of work that you've produced over the past 3 years. Compare that to LSE, where all your end of year exams count towards your degree, although to different weightings. And in fact, by the end of your second year, you can pretty much guarantee yourself a first class degree from LSE. And so say what you will, but I find that the exam structure at LSE, where it's broken down and there's a lot less pressure or emphasis on just your final year, is a lot better system in my opinion. Massive caveat here, this is probably the least objective part of the video because people's opinions on culture is very subjective and is also very much determined by who you hang out with at university. LSE and Oxford seem to have broadly the same culture. People are ambitious, intelligent and incredibly hardworking. Both institutions can be pretty intense, although for slightly different reasons. An argument can be made that LSE is probably a bit more career focused or driven relative to Oxford, where there seems to be a bit more importance or emphasis placed on continuing your studies into doing a master's or a PhD program. However, this very much depends on the department that you're in. From what I've heard, economics and management at the University of Oxford has a pretty similar culture all around to economics at LSE. I'd say both universities can be cliquey at times, but again in slightly different ways. I think Oxford has a higher reputation for this, just given the intake it has of students from private schools such as Harrow and Eton, whereas LSE manifests it in its own way through international students hanging together and perhaps only socialising with people from the same country. Ultimately, at either university, what you get out of your degree and the culture you really experience is very much up to yourself and the people you surround yourself with. Now this point is very personal to me, but after applying to Oxford's Economics and Management course, I soon realised that it actually wasn't the course for me. When I first applied, I had this idea that Economics and Management at the University of Oxford would be this really comprehensive course since it was a joint honours doing both economics and management, and so I was really attracted by this idea of doing a joint honours and studying a really comprehensive degree. In hindsight, after reading a bit into management, I don't actually find the subject all that enjoyable or interesting, and so I don't actually think I would have enjoyed half of the degree. Similarly, I applied to Oxford's E&M course over Cambridge's economics course because I thought that I wasn't good enough at maths to succeed at Cambridge, and as a result I applied for Oxford's slightly less mathematical E&M or economics and management course instead. However, by the end of year 13, I was quite confident and quite strong in both maths and further maths, and having taken a few essay-based modules at LSE, I can now confidently say that I'm better at maths maths and enjoyed doing maths-based problems more so than writing essays, which is the style of examination that you have at Oxford. Reflecting on my overall application process, I think that I ultimately applied to Oxford's E&M course for the wrong reasons. I think I applied simply for the name brand of the University of Oxford and, chose to ignore the actual content of the course itself. And I think that's one big mistake that in hindsight you should never do. And so I'm really glad that I ended up studying economics at LSE instead. One thing that's pretty clear is that Oxford has a better worldwide reputation than LSE. You can go to pretty much every country in the world and there'll be someone who knows what the University of Oxford is. It's a really historic and prestigious name. Whereas LSE, unless you're working within the finance industry or have a background in social sciences, it's unlikely that you've heard of it. In fact, I've spoken to loads of people, even within the UK, and when I tell them that I studied at the LSE, they don't know what LSE even stands for. In terms of teaching, Oxford seems to have better academic support, since you receive support from not only your college staff and your college tutors, but from the wider department, and LSE doesn't have something as comprehensive as that. However, Oxford suffers from the same problem that LSE does, in the sense that there are some professors who are really good and really focused or enthusiastic about teaching, and there are others who really could not care less. And so because of that, the quality of teaching is very variable across courses and modules. I think one of Oxford and Cambridge's main selling points, and something that I in fact found really appealing as a sixth form student, was Oxford and Cambridge's tutorial system. And this is basically where you'll have a one-to-one or a very small group session with a tutor, someone who's an expert in the subject that you're studying. And I remember finding this concept or idea of having like an really in-depth, mentally stimulating conversation with an expert in the field is a really cool idea. I remember thinking that, I would learn so much and really be able to pick at someone's brain in a way that really wasn't possible anywhere else in the UK. However, having spoken to students at the University of Oxford, it sounds like the tutorial system isn't really all that different to a regular office hour which you can book in at any other university in the UK. The only real difference is that at Oxford, it is a core part of your calendar or timetable, and it's scheduled in every single week. Whereas at LSE, for example, you'd have to go and actively book it yourself. And finally, this strays away from the comparisons that I'm making, and I just want to talk about what the effect of the Oxford rejection itself had on me. The Oxford rejection was probably my first piece of real academic failure, and it really lit or sparked a fire inside of me. That experience made me realise that I was capable of working even harder than I was before, and it instilled a sense of drive and determination that I still possess to this very day. Without that rejection, I don't know if I'd be as hardworking as I am today, and as a result, I don't know if I would have accomplished the things that I've done in my life so far without that rejection. And so for that reason, I am ultimately really grateful that I was rejected by the University of Oxford and studied at LSE instead. Now that concludes today's video. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what else you'd like to see from me. Thanks again guys, and see you soon.